And just to touch on that a bit further, with astaxanthin in the membranes, that's the membrane of the outer layer of the cell, so it protects the cell in general. And it impacts, the activity of receptors and other things, in the cell membrane. It can influence, pathways that are activated in that way. If, like I said, fights off free radicals that can cause lipid peroxidation or oxidation of the lipids in the membrane, and so therefore protecting the integrity of the membranes. And also, like I said, fighting off the inflammation, the inflammatory pathways, but it also gets into the membranes of the nucleus, so it protects the DNA from oxidation. It gets into the membranes of the mitochondria, which is a really privileged site and the source of energy production. And so it's right there in the perfect situation, in the perfect location to fight off, the reactive oxygen species that are produced as a byproduct, of energy production. So it's in all of these locations. Not only is it throughout, distributed throughout your body, it's in all the locations within the cell that really matter. And so it can have an impact on things in all of those membranes and all of those locations, and even activity in the cytoplasm or kind of the main general space within the cell. And so that really distinguishes it from other antioxidants. And in addition to directly donating electrons or potentially accepting electrons to neutralize free radicals, which is how antioxidants work, to take a reactive oxygen species or a free radical that has an unpaired electron. It can, say, donate an electron and neutralize it, so it's no longer reactive and damaging proteins and lipids, et cetera. But it can also influence your pathways that are your endogenous antioxidant systems. And so it can impact like NERV2 and like glutathione and other things that allow your body to use its own built-in antioxidant defense systems. And going back to your original question about how does this impact longevity, it also impacts longevity pathways like AMPK, which if you look into longevity, you'll see that as a pathway that's often referred to. And so AMPK is an energy sensing pathway. And so AMPK stands for AMP activated protein kinase. And so AMP in this case is, if we think about ATP as the energy source in the cells, is what the energy the mitochondria use to produce your energy. And ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It has these three phosphate groups, and the energy is stored within those phosphate bonds. And so when it essentially burns that to create energy, you'll lose a phosphate group, and it'll go from ATP, the triphosphate, to ADP, the diphosphate. And as a little tangent, this is where creatine helps to come in and play a role, where creatine can become phosphocreatine with the help of creatine kinase, which is an enzyme that helps to put a phosphate onto creatine. And then creatine becomes this buffer of energy that's storing that phosphate group, and then it can react with ADP to create more ATP. So it puts that phosphate group back from ADP, back onto ADP to create ATP, and then now your body can create more energy. Likewise, if you have an energy surplus and you don't need to burn all that energy right now, the ATP can give the phosphate back to creatine, again with the help of creatine kinase, and then you get back to ADP, and now you have your creatine, your phosphocreatine there sitting, waiting as that kind of battery, ready to give off some energy. But in the case of ADP, if that further, is utilized and goes to AMP, so adenosine monophosphate, then that's a low energy state in the cell. And in that low energy condition, that's what triggers AMPK. It gets activated because it looks at that ratio of AMP to ATP, and then it starts doing things to say, okay, let's conserve energy, let's turn off lipid synthesis and protein synthesis, and let's do things that help us with energy, like glucose uptake into the cells, and like fat oxidation to help burn to create energy. And so it does these things, and it also directly and indirectly does things that activate autophagy, the cellular cleanup mechanism. So I guess it's low on energy, and like let's clean up house and clean up the cell. And so it directly activates ULK1, which is involved in creating the autophagy process, but also it inhibits mTOR, which is the target of rapamycin, which is a well-known longevity agent, which is responsible for autophagy as well. It also activates FOXO3, which is another anti-aging gene, and actually something that out of our research with the University of Hawaii, we showed that astaxanthin upregulated FOXO3 in the heart tissue of mice, and that was what led to our inclusion in the NIH ITP program to explore longevity.
It activated it by almost double, right?
Yeah, it was like 90%. Increase, which is like a double, and so FOXO3 also influences autophagy, and so that's something that again is activated by by AMPK, and then in addition, AMPK helps to activate PGC1 alpha, which is a master regulator of mitogenesis, which is the creation of more mitochondria. And so the more mitochondria you have, the more energy that can be produced, and also influences the function of your mitochondria. And so with astaxanthin working to activate AMPK, you have these impacts on autophagy, you have impacts on mitogenesis and other factors that are critical for overall health and for longevity.
It's amazing. Now that might have been a lot for people who are naive to biochemistry, but AMPK is what is stimulated by, among other things, metformin. Mm-hmm. Which for a long time was being looked at as a potentially pro-longevity agent. But then it came to light that it also had these unintended consequences of blunting some of the adaptive, the positive aspects of exercise that we do want to stimulate. So the notion that astaxanthin can stimulate AMPK, which is also stimulated by other compounds that we know are really good for us. I believe vinegar, there's like berberine stimulates AMPK.
I mean, exercise fasting.
Yeah, fasting stimulates AMPK. So that a nutrient can stimulate the same pathway without seemingly any negative effects. That's super exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's super cool. And it helps to explain, how it can do all these things. And everyone is really excited about rapamycin, and it inhibits mTOR, but so does astaxanthin, not directly, but through, the AMPK pathway. So it really helps to back up the evidence that we've seen in terms of actual lifespan extension. So we talked about the NIH Interventions Testing Program, which is a really rigorous program in mammals, in mice, where they take mice and they follow them for their entire lifespan, which is multiple years, which ideally you do it in humans, but it would take decades, to do that study. And so this is kind of the best, the closest you can get to, using a mammal and looking at lifespan. And they follow these mice for years, and they see what agents work. And rapamycin worked, but metformin didn't work in that program. And other things like, and not to say they don't have health benefits like omega-3s or green tea or NAD-related products like NR, the precursor to NAD, did not work, in this program. But astaxanthin, like I said, did, and was the only, natural supplement type of molecule that extended lifespan more than 10%, but also, has the safety and the kind of general availability as a supplement rather than an obscure drug that's hard to get that has side effects and things like that might be much more for a niche community like rapamycin, for example. But the NIH study was also backed up by other longevity models where astaxanthin was shown to extend lifespan in worms and in fruit flies and yeast, which are common, laboratory types of testing systems to look at various aspects of disease and aging. And so astaxanthin, it makes sense when you look at its extended lifespan in all these different species or models, but also impacts these longevity pathways or these hallmarks of aging. And so like we talked about autophagy, mitochondrial function or dysfunction, preventing dysfunction or mitigating that, reducing oxidative stress and inflammation, all these critical aspects, the oxidation of proteins and lipids, impacts or helps to prevent those things which otherwise can cause aging or other health issues.
I was so pleasantly surprised when I was reading a couple years ago a paper by the late great Bruce Ames, who's done a lot of work in the micronutrient space, longevity space. The paper was, I forget the exact title of the paper, but it was something, people can Google this. It was like Bruce Ames, putative longevity vitamins. And I was just reading it in hopes of trying to discover something new. And as I was getting further and further into the paper, it was like listing off all of these different compounds. I believe lutein and zeaxanthin were among them. Magnesium was he dubbed a putative longevity vitamin. And then I come to astaxanthin, and I was so pleasantly surprised to see it there because I had been already taking astaxanthin for 5-6 years at that point. Do you think it's apt to refer to astaxanthin as a longevity vitamin of sorts?
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's safe like a vitamin in that sense, and something you should take every day. And it's similar in the sense that you don't always feel it, like when you first take it. Some people actually feel benefits with their joints, for example, like day one or week one or month one. Others do not, or maybe they don't have joint issues. But it's like a vitamin. It's something that you take every day to benefit your overall health and longevity. And it has amazing science behind it. And from a longevity standpoint, it's not just lifespan, but it's also health span, where you can have the quality of life improved because it impacts all these issues related to heart and brain and joint and muscle and liver and immune and gut health and all these things. And so you're extending lifespan and increasing the health during those years. And in that study with the NIH, we had a 12% increase in lifespan, which if you were to extrapolate that to humans, would be potentially like around a decade. And so if you could have an extra decade of lifespan, and that lifespan could be healthy, that would be huge. I mean, it's not living to 200, but who wouldn't want an extra decade healthy? I mean, that would be great, right?
Of course, and especially for men, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but in this study, it was male mice in particular that saw this 10% boost, which isn't to say that it's not also very valuable for women in terms of warding off age-related chronic disease. But maybe you can speak to that. What do you think it was about the fact that the mice that saw this 10% benefit were male?
Well, the female mice already lived longer than the males if you look at the controls. And so they're already living longer. And this study allowed the males to catch up to the females, if you will. At the end of the day, the females still lived slightly longer than the males, but rather than the males being like 10% less, they're now like 1% less or something. So they caught up much closer. And
helps level the playing field.
Yeah.
For the fellas.
So hopefully, people like older in age, they can live the same duration. That'd be great, right? Rather than one dying off sooner. But yeah, so I think, there are obviously differences biologically between male and females and hormones and things that do influence aging. And so it appears that what astaxanthin is doing has more of an impact in the male species related to longevity, at least in that study. We'd have to see, in humans or other animal models if that is a male versus female specific finding for lifespan. But we do know from looking at all these studies in humans, clinical and then also non-clinical studies in animals, for example, that astaxanthin does benefit males and females.
And it also benefits male and female health span.
Yeah. And so the studies, to clarify, don't specifically measure health span per se in terms of like, let's follow your heart health for the next 30 years, but they're more, specific studies that look at, cardiovascular biomarkers over 12 weeks, or like in the rheumatoid arthritis study, they look at it over a fixed period of time. And so, but you can infer that, okay, if I have all these benefits on critical areas of health and I'm also increasing lifespan, then that should give a health span benefit. But there are ways to potentially, say in the NIH program, they have a variation of their study where rather than just looking at lifespan, they follow the health span of the animals, and they will look at different time points along the way before they pass away, and then look at their organs and see like, okay, are there any issues that would indicate, liver issues, heart issues, which maybe you wouldn't be able to see on the surface level just looking at the animal, but if you kind of take a closer look, you can see, are you influencing aspects of health at the kind of tissue, cellular type of level.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.